Alright guys, so we have the Talon, the install of the Kraft Werks turbo kit all done now. We just got back from ride and I kind of wanted to make sure that I went through an entire heat cycle and ride session with it before I started showing you guys how to install it, make sure I did everything right. So I took some video of me doing it, but I felt like it's getting a little long-winded. So what I'm going to do is kind of just go over the instruction manual with you real quick so I can show you where everything goes. That's the biggest part about this install, is that it tells you what to do, but it doesn't tell you where to do it. And so if for like the oil return line from the turbo, it tells you to run the line. It doesn't tell you where, in front, behind the motor, above it. So you're kind of left to your own devices, I guess, in a couple ways. So I'm just going to kind of skim through the instructions real quick with you guys, so that way you can more or less just see where stuff goes, because that's going to be the biggest holdup on the install here.
Shit.
Okay, so we disconnected the battery. We've got the intake side all off, the exhaust all off. The headers are off. I just took out all of the intake snorkel pieces. The entire intake box is off. And so now we're down to the throttle body. Okay, so once you have the intake and exhaust all removed, you're going to go down to, they ask you to start removing the injectors. Now in the instructions, they want you to move this entire upper collar and stuff, but you don't need to do that. There's 2 bolts on each side. You just need to remove those. You can lift all the injectors out and unplug the injectors. So I wouldn't mess around with undoing that guy right there. That was kind of a pain. And then on the side of the throttle body, there's just a plate, so we're just going to replace it with this, which allows us to run a vacuum line, which is really smart, so we don't actually have to bore a hole in the throttle body. This is for the California guys. And then the throttle body adapter plate, you're going to take off the stock plastic one. Make sure you pull the O-ring out of there. And then you're just going to replace it with their new aluminum one. No big deal. We'll just install it with the 5 screws. Make sure you take your time and don't strip those out. The injectors, you're going to grab the new injectors. From there, all we're doing is stilling this kind of orangish, reddish collar that sits in the middle of the injector. We're going to still it from the old one and put it on the new ones. And then we'll go ahead and re-screw those, put the injectors back in, re-screw the fuel rail down, and make sure that we reconnect the injectors. Now we're going to get onto the plenum. The intake plenum is what they're calling it. So this guy is going to come pre-assembled. The problem is that the boots here that go on to the throttle body adapter plate are too long. So the boots are 3 inches long and they need to be 2 inches. So there's a little bracket, so whenever you take out the intake, or the intake air box, it has a little bracket that's attached to the frame. So you have to avoid that, and you'll see when you're installing it. I'll try and cut into it, but what I did was just got a pair of snips like these guys and just made quick work, like I said. And maybe they change it on the kit by the time this video even comes out, but they send you with a 3-incher and it needs to be cut down to 2 inches. So here's where you can kind of see those hoses, these guys. So you need to cut them down, because otherwise there's a bracket up top here that'll hit. You can see it whenever the rear box is off, but I don't want to take it off again. So be prepared to cut these guys. 1 inch worked out perfect for them. Start with the bottom, because this bottom is much bigger than the top is, so it takes a lot of force to kind of get it around the throttle body adapter. So get that on first, loosen everything, and then put the plenum on and you're good to go. And then you'll still the IAT sensor out of the stock airbox. It's just on the back side, on the firewall side. Pull that out, put a little O-ring on it, and then reinstall it on the plenum housing towards the front. So you'll have to pull out these 2 screws, put it in with the O-ring, and then put the screws back in, and that's going to hold it there. This is kind of those hoses I was telling you about. You've got to cut them down. You can even see how short they are in this picture. So I don't know why they send such long ones, but you've got to cut them down. So from 2 to 3 inches was perfect for me. So that's what I would do. Now this was a part that we kind of fought with. So we're just doing the oil fill relocation is basically all we're doing. So you get this hardware for it. But on this picture, we could not tell where they were saying it went. So what we finally figured out was that they're putting it on the side over here. And then so now it just connects onto this bar right underneath the battery box there. So you can kind of see that it just, now it brings it from back here up to the side, so it's easier to fill from the actual side of the car. So it's a cool design. It's just hard to tell from the pictures where it's actually going. And then we're gonna install the new copper crush rings into the manifold. I used a little bit of dielectric grease and just dabbed 2 sides of it to hold it in place while I was installing the exhaust manifold. So this is where we ran into trouble. So it shows 4 screws, or the 4 nuts, to install the manifold, but you can't find the 4 screws anywhere. So what we found out, what they did was they have it packaged, but it's packaged as bolts and nuts and lock washers. So you would think that you don't, like those were a set, but it's not. So you have to use you have to kind of disassemble the set, because the bolts are going to go over here into the turbo outlet, the bolts and the lock washers, but then the nuts then you take off and then you use those for the exhaust manifold. So the hardware is all there, but you have to disassemble kind of how they have it together, which you just wouldn't expect that. Just because they had it together, you assume that it's kind of a complete part like that. And so once you know that, it's easy to install the exhaust manifolds. They went in really well. We'll get those in there, then you'll torque them to 20 pounds. Install the bracket, the turbo mounting bracket. So what that kind of looks like is it's gonna go down here. So you're gonna leave it resting, connect the upper, leave it resting, and kind of just roll it where it comfortably wants to be on this motor mount, and then mark these holes. Make sure that you lift this guy, you're holding this bracket up enough, because it's easy to go too low, and then because it has a round bar on the backside, then that nut gets kind of squished in there and it's hard to get to. So make sure that you're kind of paying attention to that and you have it scooted up enough to get to those nuts in the back. Okay, from there we're finally going to start installing the turbo. So the gasket for it has twisty ties, so it's connected here, so you don't have to try and find it. But you'll grab 4 of those, the bolts, lock washers, and nuts in that little packet, and you'll use the entire kit to install this guy. Now this is kind of the part that bums me out, because they say on here to go ahead and install it, and they say to add anti-seize, install, tighten, and hand tighten the nuts for now. But they never go back anywhere in the instructions and tell you to go ahead and tighten them. So they'll tell you to go ahead and get the turbo exit pipe, I've always called them mid pipes, but and you'll install that and anti-seize it, hand tighten it, and they'll have you tighten on the exhaust, and then they'll tell you on this to go back to step 39, which is the turbo outlet, and to go ahead and torque those to 30 pounds. But they never tell you to go back and retighten the actual turbo flange to the exhaust manifold. So make sure you go back and tighten that, because if you're just following the instructions, you may miss out on it. So this guy is on the front of the crank service, I think they call it the crank service nut or something like that. This will come pretty much assembled. What we did was drop the pan. So if you go ahead and just take out all the bolts and drop the skid plate, you can get right to it. It's just on the other side. It's, you can maybe see it back there, but it's right on the front of the crank, so it's really easy to get to if you drop the skid plate. So it's worth taking the 10 minutes to zap those off. It'll make your life a whole lot easier. So get the stock cap off, put on their new one, and then you're good to go. Same thing, make sure that we still the old O-ring off of the stock one and put it on the new one. They don't provide you with a new one. And then you'll just tighten that guy on. Then we'll fill up this is the oil feed line. So it's right to the bottom left of the starter, and then it actually goes around the front. So same thing, they kind of tell you to install it, but they don't tell you where. So what you're gonna do is come over here to the driver's side. See if I can get it to focus. So there's the starter. So we're gonna steal from this guy right here, and then it actually goes around the front of the motor. So we kind of have it going up and around the front. And then it comes down here and feeds into the top of the turbo there, right there. So that one's pretty easy if you know that you're feeding it around the front. Let's see. So then you do the oil return line. So we had a hard time because we started with the turbo side and then tried to mate it up to the crankshaft side, and it worked so much better once we released everything and got the did the crankshaft side, got that all snugged up, and then we could kind of leave it loose and see where it wanted to lay and attach it to the turbo. So that's the way I would go about it if it were me. And then this guy, once you get to the intake side, it goes pretty smooth. It's pretty kind of common sense. Now I had a hard time, I don't think you can see it, but you change out these bolts, but because I have the aftermarket cage, I couldn't quite do that. It didn't work up with the bolts they had, so I ended up just using the same bolts that were in the cage, adding different lock nuts to the back to make my intake bracket work. You see right there that they kind of have the stock one, so, but that's just if you have an aftermarket cage. That might be a little bit of a hang up, so make sure you have nuts for the back of those. And then from there we kind of get into the plumbing. Not a big deal. All of this stuff goes really smooth. It's really easy to install. You just have to, I would strongly suggest that you have a 8mm nut driver. That'll make all of these hose clamps way easier to deal with. So you'll install all of the intake. Then the actual intake off the airbox will actually go back into your original snorkel. We've got all of the intake filter, everything done. Exhaust side is all plumbed, so we really just have the intercooler and final intake side plumbing to do. I'm working on boring out the holes for the intercooler in the back little hatch area. So I've got to do that, and after that she's already tuned. It has the program in her, so we're getting really close. So I'm installing the intercooler mounting plate here, and I marked all of the holes according to the diagram. I laid it down and did a center punch in each of them so I could mark them perfectly, but they're definitely not the perfect. The center two are, but the sides aren't. So if I did this again, I would probably just mark the center two and then re-drill the sides once it's installed. I used a hole saw to cut these guys through, but what I ended up having to do was kind of oval that out for this piece to actually fit in, because even though you cut the perfect holes according to the template and the size of them, you still because you have this, you know, this area that has to go through, it kind of has to be oval to get through there because this guy's all bent. So you kind of have to follow that through, and then I ended up ovaling that one to fit it through. So now though, I'm gonna have to redo these side holes because they're a little off. So we'll do that now. From there, it's still just hoses and hoses. Not anything too exciting. Again, they're going to send you a hose that you have to cut. So those long snips, they work really good. So you can cut that real easy and don't get any debris in the intake. This just kind of goes over what it's going to look like. The blow-off valve comes pre-assembled, so even though it's a part on here, it's going to come pre-assembled. So you just have to put it on and tighten her down. And then after that, we're just installing the intercooler. The intercooler just mounts, if it'll focus, to the back of the roll cage, basically in the center of the back of the seats. It has this bracket. We had an issue with this just because, again, we have the aftermarket cage. So this bar was about 1/8 of an inch bigger than what the stock one is apparently. So we ended up having to, we just got a flap disc and just kind of ground it out so it would wrap around okay. And then just install the hardware on top. Once you get it centered and where you want it, install the hardware, route the hoses down to the back, and then she's pretty much good to go. Yep, everything else from here on out is really just tuning. I thought the instructions were really good. Obviously my biggest issue was just the fact that they didn't tell you where anything needs to go. They just kind of told you to run a line. So it was kind of to your discretion, which I didn't like. I would have thought they would have been a little bit more specific as far as run this, you know, around the front of the motor, or, you know, just wherever, whatever. So I didn't like that they kind of left so much up to interpretation. But it is a pretty simple install at the end of the day. I mean, if I were going to put it on a scale, it would probably be, you know, 3, maybe 4 out of 5 in difficulty. So it's not a big deal. So it's just, I had to look at the picture a lot of times, and I had to ask buddies that had already installed it for pictures to see what was going on, where it needed to be. Then it was easy. So I'll show you guys the process to do the tuning. This was the part that made me the most nervous, because mechanical stuff I'm fine with. I'm not a technology guy, so I was super nervous about this part, and I don't like it. It's not my thing. So I'll show you kind of what you have to do and what to expect. You have to run the PV3 power commander here. That's what's going to put a tune into the car. So your computer little outlet guy, at least on mine, is underneath the driver's seat. It's just in a little cap to keep it there. And then so you just unplug it so you know it's the right one, because it's not actually connected to anything. That's just my seatbelt safety. So it's just a holder cap. So you unplug it from there. You'll plug it into the dyno jet. As soon as you turn on the key, it'll talk to itself automatically and kind of start uploading. So I was told that it would kind of just load itself once it was on and sitting here for 3 or 5 minutes. Mine never downloaded the VIN and all of its information to here. So what I had to do was, because DynoJet sends it out with, I think there was 4 programs pre-installed, I just downloaded the first program, and that got it talking and made it to where it would connect. From there, all you have to do is take this guy into the house. You'll unplug it, obviously. You'll take it into the house, plug in the USB one, put it onto your laptop or whatever you're using. It'll pull up a little Provision, little click-em-a-bobber up in the top. So that'll pull up. You can click on that, and then it'll pull up your tune, because it'll, whichever one you selected, then you're just going to start up an email to Jason at Kraft Werks or whoever you're sending it to, and you can literally just have those windows open next to each other, drag that over into your email and email it to him. He'll send you one back. You just drag it, same thing, from his email over into the Power Vision little tile square, and then it'll download. It takes like 2 seconds. Then you can take it out of the computer, bring it back over here, and then once you have it plugged in, you can go to Tune Flash, and then from here you can go through whatever tune you need to do, whatever he sent you, click on it, click again, and then it'll start. My lights started flashing and stuff on my instrument cluster. So up here, all those lights were flashing and stuff. It took about maybe 10 minutes or so to download, and then it tells you to turn it off and turn it back on. And that's about it. So I had a lot of issues with my tune once I got it downloaded to the car. It wouldn't idle for anything, and once you got on it, it clearly felt like it wasn't getting enough fuel. It would almost start to build boost, and then once it got to about ready to turn, switch to second gear, it would just fall on its face, like there just wasn't enough fuel in the map to carry it over, is what it felt like. So I reached out to Kraft Werks. They kind of gave me, honestly, the runaround a little bit as far as, no, recheck this, check your sensors, this and that. And so I went back through the entire kit, checked every nut and bolt, retorqued everything, and I took it out, and still the exact same thing. Like, it just falls on its face, would not build boost, wouldn't shift. Like, there was clearly something wrong. So same thing, they kind of, well, maybe this, maybe that. And so I finally reached out to PPEI based on a buddy's recommendation, and they said, yeah, we've got a tune we're in the works for, so if you want to help us out, help us get it dialed in, we'll send it over. It'll definitely get the car running. So they sent over a tune, I put it in, and it's done flawless. We just got back from the dunes over in Syracuse, Kansas. We had a good time, and the car didn't have an issue the entire time. It started right up. The AFRs were really good the entire time, so I'm really happy with the tune they sent. So, and they just let me know that they have a revised tune as well. So if you're having issues with the Kraft Werks tune, just know that there's other tunes coming. And hopefully by the time this video's out, I know Kraft Werks is working fairly frantically to get their tune fixed. So fingers crossed that their tune is just fixed by the time this comes out, and you don't even have to worry about anything, and the kit just comes done, and you can plug it in and be good to go. all in all, I am really happy with this Kraft Werks turbo kit. It's a very clean installation. It's so nice. So I highly recommend it. I want to thank Kraft Werks as well for being so involved with myself and kind of the whole process of everything. Dave over there was awesome. Also, my buddy Andy, that's with Kraft Werks, but also Type R Talons. He's been amazing throughout the entire thing and made sure everything came out on time, and that I was, you know, towards the beginning of the list to make sure I could get a video out with the kit installed as quick as possible. So I really want to take the time to thank those two individuals personally, but then also just make sure that you know that I would not hesitate buying this kit again. I would do it in a heartbeat. It's a really nice kit, easy installation, so I am over the moon about the kit. So as always, thanks for watching, you guys, and we will see you on the next one.